Good afternoon and welcome to Conversations with the Candidates at theoklahoman.com. I'm Chris Castile and we are in our studio downtown Oklahoma City with Democratic senatorial candidate Abby Broyles. Ms. Broyles, thanks so much for coming in. Tomorrow we will have Republican U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe. And both of these conversations, if you weren't able to catch them live, will be on our website, oklahoman.com, and on our YouTube channel, as are the ones that we did earlier with 5th District candidates, Congresswoman Kendra Horn and State Senator Stephanie Bice. Ms. Broyles, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Chris.
It's less than 3 weeks away. I know that you're very familiar to a lot of people in the metro area and beyond, everywhere that gets Oklahoma City television. But why don't you just take a minute and tell us a little bit about your background. You born in 1989 here in Oklahoma City or Bethany, I guess?
Yeah, I grew up in the Bethany area, a lifelong Oklahoman. From the time I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. And so I started my TV career when I was 20. I rushed through college, graduated in 2.5 years, and spent 10 years on the air as a news anchor and reporter, mostly at Channel 4 here in Oklahoma City. I put myself through law school at night while working full-time as a journalist, and am now a practicing attorney.
Where did you go where'd you get your undergrad? Where did you study?
I went to California Baptist University. I graduated from Bethany High School, and then I went to law school right downtown here at Oklahoma City University School of Law.
Okay, California Baptist University is where? California.
Yeah, it's in Riverside, California.
Okay,
yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, how did you come across that one?
Yeah, you know, my mom has been a professor at Southern Nazarene University in Bethany this is her 40th year actually. And if my parents were going to let me go across the country at 17 to go to college, there were a select number of colleges I could go to. And CBU offered me a scholarship, and I was able to work in news out in the Los Angeles market. And so I just went out there for a couple of years.
So this is your first race
Yes.
of any kind for politics. Why this race and why this time?
Like so many Oklahomans, I think that Washington is a place that's broken, where career politicians go to serve themselves instead of serving the people they're supposed to represent. I saw firsthand as a journalist how out of touch our current senator is. Back in October, there was a story that we'd been working on for a couple of years. A number of media outlets were dealing with mold and asbestos on base housing at Tinker Air Force Base. Families had called Senator Inhofe's office, had emailed, got no response for months and months. And so they called the news stations, and we started telling their stories. And it was in October that Senator Inhofe came down for a press conference in Midwest City, and I will never forget him stepping up to that microphone and telling these families how nice their housing was. And if it was this nice when he was in the Army, he would have stayed longer. My heart sank, and I got angry and thought, he is incredibly out of touch with everyday Oklahomans, the people whose living rooms I've been in for the past 10 years, listening to them and telling their stories. And so it was a few weeks after that story that I decided to get off the sidelines and jump in this race to run against him.
Had you ever considered running for office before this?
To be honest, no. I wanted to be a journalist. I went to law school, and running for office was never in my plan. But like so many people, I decided to get in the game because so much is at stake. The world is on fire right now. We need leadership. We need real leadership. And instead, we have, again, someone completely out of touch who's no longer up for the job.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you said you're a lawyer. I mean, you passed the bar last year, right? And you became a lawyer last year?
Yes.
So what did you go into practice? I mean, what kind of law do you practice now?
I primarily do family law. As soon as I passed the bar, I opened my own law practice and practice mostly here in Oklahoma City.
Are you doing that now?
Yes, I am.
And so by family law, what do you mean?
Family law is divorce, child support, and that sort of thing.
So within, I guess, 6 months of passing the bar, you started running for the Senate is because of the press conference that Inhofe had, is that right?
Yes, and you know, I had always planned on continuing my career as a journalist. I went to law school to expand my skill set and advocate for Oklahomans in another way in the courtroom. And so I was actually working full-time as an anchor on Channel 4 and also practicing law at the same time. And so I had to step down from my job, obviously as a journalist, to run for office, but continued my law practice throughout the past year.
Okay. I mean, obviously we'll get to these. There are a lot of issue differences between you and the Republican senator, and your campaign has been focusing heavily on his age and his tenure, you know, how long he's been there. But with tenure comes the very valuable commodity of seniority, which would take decades to replace that. So how would you kind of compensate for the lack of seniority that Oklahoma would suddenly have if you became the senator?
Yeah, and I think that our campaign has not made this race so much about his age, but about his ability to do the job and be an effective leader. This is someone who ranks 83rd out of 100 for the worst attendance record in the Senate. Oklahomans are hardworking people. We want our elected leaders to work just as hard as we do. He doesn't come back here to Oklahoma and hold town halls. He isn't listening to families. Instead, he's flooding his neighbors up in Miami, Oklahoma. He's ignoring military families at Tinker Air Force Base. He's ignoring teachers who go 4 times a year out to meet with the federal delegation and talk to him about public education. We need a senator who's going to listen to us and go and work for us and work across the aisle. You talk about seniority. Everybody knows how Jim Inhofe is going to vote. He's going to toe the party line. We need leaders who are going to work across the aisle to get things done, because right now we have a do-nothing Senate. Mitch McConnell's desk is where legislation goes to die. We need leaders who are going to work across the aisle to get the work done, because the one thing I hear from Oklahomans every single day is they don't feel like Washington is working for them. They feel like you go to D.C. and then you just completely lose touch with the values we have back here in our state. And they want someone who's going to work hard.
Well, that seniority, it is very valuable up there. I mean, Inhofe is kind of the go-to guy for things having to do with military bases. I mean, even on the Indian water treaty that was reached with Oklahoma City and the state of Oklahoma, they were able to get that through, on a vehicle that was already moving, because Senator Inhofe had kind of this bill that he could get it done quickly. That's probably where they would go for any kind of legislation on McGirt, on the Supreme Court case having to do with the Creek Nation. So I guess my question to you is, how do you compensate for that lack of, it's not without its value. Mm-hmm. Whatever your differences are with his voting record, seniority itself, any senator would tell you that is the case. That's how that town runs.
Well, and if we look at the numbers as far as the Senate goes, there's a good chance we're going to flip the Senate. Mm-hmm. He would no longer be chair of Armed Services if that's the case. But I would also point out that while he touts his chairmanship of Armed Services and hangs his hat on seniority, where was he during the biggest threat to our country this year in this pandemic? That's right, he was quiet back in January when he was selling off his stocks. He treated this like it was all a hoax, not a big deal. Was not wearing a mask for months and months. This is someone who, again, may have the title, but isn't showing up for Oklahomans. And we deserve a leader who's going to take things like a pandemic seriously. It has devastated our families, our small business owners, our schools, and he's been completely absent. It's been a complete lack of leadership from Washington, D.C. this year.
And what would you say about the pandemic? So I guess you're talking about Congress and the president there when you're talking about the lack of leadership on the pandemic? Would you say that about Stitt as well, the governor?
I would. I think there's been a lack of leadership both in D.C. and right here in our state. In your paper yesterday, we learned that ICU beds are full in Oklahoma City. Folks out in rural Oklahoma where mask wearing is not a thing are now infiltrating our hospitals. We should have taken this seriously from the very beginning, and instead we had leaders who treated it like a hoax because for whatever reason they don't believe in science, what the experts are saying, and we didn't take the precautions we needed to. And now here we are in this mess, and the people who are suffering the most are people who are out of work, parents who are having to deal with their kids learning from home because we didn't take this seriously from the beginning, our small business owners who are waiting for that next round of PPP. There are so many people suffering right now, and in the meantime, my opponent and his DC buddies are just cramming through the Supreme Court nominee while Oklahomans are hurting.
So I was going to get both of those, but let me get to the coronavirus aid, because it's news to no one that there's a huge gulf between the Republican Senate and the Democratic House on how much relief is needed. I think the Senate is now, McConnell may be offering $500 billion while the House is closer to $2 trillion. Is there a point, is there right now, is there any point where the House should maybe just take whatever they can get just because people need money so much, or should the House hold out for what it can get? It looks now like there may not be any kind of package before the election, but we'll be right back here with this tug of war afterwards. What's your position? I mean, do you feel like at some point they need to get some money out, no matter how much?
Absolutely. I mean, at some point, they need to take some action, period. Oklahomans are suffering. I hear it in every community I'm in, and people are frustrated. Instead of, getting together and working across the aisle to get things done, there's just this stalemate. And no one benefits when nothing gets done. So, yeah, I think there needs to be some compromise.
Well, let me ask you about some provisions of what should be in it. I mean, besides PPP, what would be like one or two necessary elements for you in any relief package?
I think funding for our public schools. So many teachers, parents, administrators across the state have told me they are still falling so far behind. I did a series of Zoom town halls with classroom teachers, and they told me that students trying to do their lessons on their parents' cell phones because they didn't have access to the technology like tablets and laptops to be able to even get any sort of education. You go to rural Oklahoma, and so many families can't even get access to the internet. That's why I support expanding rural broadband. Our kids are falling behind. They are victims in all of this because we don't have leaders doing the right thing. We need funding to go into our public schools, not our private schools, but use those dollars to put them back into our public school system so that our kids are still able to get a quality public education even during this extraordinary time.
Okay, public schools. What about the unemployment piece? There was the Republicans kind of balked at it and even tried to change the provision in the relief package about the $600 federal subsidy. And that expired. There's been no extension of that for everyone. I mean, some states have done it, some have on this $300 deal. Where are you on that? I mean, should there be another federal supplement to the state and unemployment benefits?
I do, and I don't necessarily think it has to be $600, but it needs to be something. I've stood in the unemployment lines and talked to people who are out of work, and folks want jobs. They want to go back to work, but right now in this economy, the jobs just aren't there. Meanwhile, these families are suffering. They're trying to put food on the table for their kids and keep the lights on. An extension of the federal unemployment, whatever the dollar amount may be, I think is desperately needed right now.
Direct payments, any more direct payments, do you think?
I think that another round of stimulus will help our local economy, give a little boost to it. My opponent was one of the 8 senators who voted against this bill back in March, the first round of stimulus checks that went out to families. And I think that was wrong from the very beginning. These are extraordinary times. And
well, which one are you talking about? Not the CARES Act.
It was the second round of COVID relief back in March. He was one of 8 senators who voted against it. That was the bill that provided the first round of stimulus checks to families.
Okay. That wasn't the one with the $1,200 payments to everybody. That was in the CARES Act. But I remember that second one. I think a lot of Republicans voted against it because it had a provision that said people should be able to take family leave. That small businesses would have to provide family and medical leave to anybody who left because of the coronavirus. But that wasn't the $1,200 one. That was part of the CARES package. Let's talk about what's happening in the Senate now. The Judiciary Committee this week holding hearings on Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to succeed Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the Supreme Court. If Democrats were in control of the Senate, do you think they would or even should consider the nomination this late in a presidential election year, if they were in control?
I agree with what my opponent said 4 years ago, that during a presidential election year, the Senate should not be confirming a nominee to the Supreme Court. We have an important election on November 3rd. We should let the American people decide. That was just 4 years ago. My opponent has flip-flopped on that, and now here we are rushing through this nominee. That is the priority instead of taking care of Oklahomans. So no, I don't think that this process should be happening. I think that we should have followed precedent, just like Jim Inhofe said 4 years ago.
Okay. I know you've been busy probably, campaigning and probably haven't watched the hearings so much, but what concerns do you have about Barrett? I mean, would you vote against her, do you think, at this point, whether, no matter how you felt about her nomination being forwarded or considered, would you vote for her?
Her previous statements on the Affordable Care Act really concern me, and healthcare is my top priority. And I have talked to so many families who cannot afford health insurance, so they simply go without it. I want to make sure that we're protecting Oklahomans with pre-existing conditions. That's 1 in 3 of us. I met a family from my church several months ago, and they have 2 daughters under the age of 10, and they both have pre-existing conditions that they will live with for the rest of their life. They didn't choose that, but they have to live with the threat of losing access to health care because if we dismantle the ACA, that's on the line. Everyone with a pre-existing condition should be worried about dismantling the ACA. And I don't think it's perfect, but we need to build on it. We have 200,000 Oklahomans who would benefit from Medicaid expansion, which the voters of Oklahoma passed back in June. That is a staple of the ACA, and if we dismantle that, those Oklahomans, once again, will just not have access to health care, and I think that that's wrong. And that is my biggest concern with her at this point. So
you said at the beginning when you were talking about the ACA that a lot of people can't afford health insurance. So obviously the ACA, it's still not even affordable for everybody, and that's even the supporters have expressed concerns about the premiums and the deductibles, the increases, in the last 10 years to those. Any idea about how to address that? I mean, you already provide subsidies. The federal government already provides subsidies for the most low-income people who don't qualify for Medicaid. They can get subsidies to buy on the exchange, but it's still not helping. I guess with some people, there are still a lot of uninsured people. How do you get to them?
Yeah, well, we need to stop stripping funding away from the ACA. I'm one of those people who gets my health insurance from the marketplace. When I stepped down from my job at Channel 4 to run for office, I went on the marketplace to shop for health insurance. It is a daunting task to try to find a plan that offers actual coverage that you can afford. And I know so many families are in that same situation, and when you look at those numbers, so many of them just choose to go without. So we make it more affordable by stop taking funding away from the program, stop trying to, to destroy this program that could help so many people.
Do you think you need to raise the income levels of who can get federal subsidies? Because there's no way around that part of it. When you talk about shopping, and I don't know how many insurance companies are even offering now. I think there's just 2, right? That offer plans, like to get a silver plan or a gold plan that meets the requirements of the ACA. So there's not a lot of options. So how do you address that? I mean, for a person like you, self-employed, might even have to employ or have to insure employees. Where do you go? I mean, how is that solved, that part of it?
Yeah, I think that you're right that you raised the income level. I mean, for a family who's trying to shop for health insurance, when you're looking at a premium that's over $1,000 a month, that's a significant chunk of a paycheck for so many Oklahomans. So I think that that's one way to solve it. We also just have to prioritize healthcare. Right now we have a Senate that's ready to dismantle the ACA at any time, and instead of having leaders who are going to advocate for better access to quality, affordable healthcare. So I think it's another failed act in leadership on the Senate's part.
It was a monumental task for the Democrats and the President Obama to put the ACA together. All of the pieces that had to be put together, all of the different constituencies that were involved in putting that together, the healthcare groups, all the kinds of providers, insurers. If the ACA is struck down, do you think Democrats need to go through that exercise again and try to negotiate all those different things that they had to do, or do you think they should just try to get a public option, a Medicare for all plan?
I don't support Medicare for all. I do think that we need to take this opportunity. I hope that the ACA isn't dismantled, but we need to find a solution that involves working across the aisle to come up with something that we're all at least, okay with. And, right now we aren't hearing a plan from the Republicans. If they put forth a comprehensive plan, then great, but let's hear it. So far we haven't heard anything. It's just, let's destroy the ACA and put all these people with pre-existing conditions at risk of losing their health care. That is not the direction we should be going. We should be finding common ground, and I believe it's possible, but we need leaders who are going to be at the table having that conversation.
What's your objection to Medicare for all?
tell me how it works. I just think that it's a huge overhaul of our healthcare system right now. I think that we have a system, the ACA isn't perfect, but let's build on it. I don't want to force people off their health insurance plans if they like their plan. If you like your health insurance, you should get to keep it. I think of so many people like my friends who are part of unions. They've worked so hard to have that particular health insurance plan. I think it's unfair to take them off that plan. So that's why I talk about access to affordable quality health care, and there's a way to do it, but we have to have the courage to work across the aisle to find the right solution for everyone.
Right. Let's get back to some other things about what the new justice might, there's always a lot riding on a Supreme Court nomination. You never even know how they're going to vote. It was, excuse me, Trump's first, appointee, Neil Gorsuch, who wrote the majority and the McGirt opinion, the opinion this July that established that the Muskogee Creek Reservation was never disestablished, that all criminal cases involving Indians are subject to federal or tribal jurisdiction. There will be civil questions that arise. A lot have arisen already. Let me ask you how Congress should deal with McGirt. I mean, is there anything that the delegation should do?
I think the delegation needs to respect the tribe's sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
We need to work government to government. You brought this up earlier, but back in 2005, Jim Inhofe attached that rider to a transportation bill that created the mechanism for what we just saw with the EPA's latest decision, allowing the state to regulate the environment on tribal land. And that is a slap in the face to our tribes. This Supreme Court decision was a big victory for them. We need to stop working against the tribes, work government to government, respect their sovereignty. I just think that we are able to come up with solutions and work together, and without all the fear mongering. Federal prosecutors have been able to work with tribal prosecutors and state prosecutors in the past. They can get the criminal element figured out. I know that we can, but right now we're playing partisan games that just anger the tribes and disrespect their sovereignty. And right after this landmark Supreme Court decision came down.
Well, I think I think people understand that. I think you can respect sovereignty and defer to the tribes, but still have concerns about how things are going to be, worked out and over the next few years. And environmental regulations may be one, but certainly state tax issues are going to be a big one probably. Who can be taxed on the reservations. I guess when you're saying government to government, are you talking about compacting a lot of this?
Yes.
State government to tribal government.
Yes, and actually having real conversations.
Mm-hmm.
The last time that I've talked to many of the tribal leaders, they said when they go out to Washington, D.C., my opponent is the one member of the federal delegation who won't meet with them. That's not working government to government. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that we're having these conversations. These are important relationships, and what's good for the tribes is good for Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. So basically, should the delegation just kind of step back for right now, do you think? Just kind of defer to the tribes and what the state kind of work out on this?
I think the federal delegation has an important role to play. I think that they need to be working with the tribes, though, to find the right solution to move forward, and not have the conversation without them even involved. And I fear that that's what is going to happen if my opponent is reelected, because he's shown us time and time again that he works against the tribes. And I know that that's a concern that they have, too, from my conversations with the tribes.
Okay. Another issue with the Supreme Court, Second Amendment issues. There were a couple of really big cases, huge cases, gun cases in 2008, 2010, in which the court established first in D.C. and then nationwide that there's an individual right to own handguns. And since then, the court has been really reluctant to take on any kind of restrictions in any states or municipalities on guns. I was wondering, there had been, after almost every horrific massacre, school shootings, Las Vegas, whatever one you want to name, there's a lot of talk about steps that should be taken to prevent some of these events. What would you support in the way in terms of gun laws?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say this. I support the Second Amendment. I support responsible gun ownership. I think that if you have a criminal history, you should have to undergo a background check. And most Americans agree.
What if you don't have a criminal history?
No matter what, I think universal background checks are important. But what I'm saying is, you shouldn't be able to go buy a gun from a gun show without going through the same background check as if you went to a shooting range and you were going to buy a gun. I think that we have to think of this issue through the eyes of parents who are dropping their kids off at school every morning and have to look at what they're wearing in case they have to identify them later on in the day. That's the epidemic we're talking about. I grew up in the Columbine era. We have not done a single thing to take care of our kids. And I don't think that we need these extraordinary measures that some members of my party want to put forward. On this one, I do think, though, universal background checks, that is a reasonable, responsible way to make sure that we're keeping guns out of the wrong hands.
Semi-automatic weapons, or would you support a ban on those?
I would be willing to look at a ban on certain assault weapons. Yes.
Okay. What about the magazines or some of the ammo that's used with these too? Would that be included?
Keep
the
your
high capacity.
Right. I mean, keep your rifles, keep your shotguns, keep your pistols. But when it comes to these military-style weapons, I think most people agree that the average Oklahoman doesn't need one. But I'm not going to put a firm answer on that yet, because I want to look at the entire piece of legislation as a whole before I'd be willing to say that I would support that.
There's also a lot of concern about a Justice Barrett in terms of precedents like Roe versus Wade or Casey, Planned Parenthood, restrictions on abortion. And right now, absent that, a lot of the Democrats, including several of the presidential candidates and some on the House Appropriations Committee, have been looking at the Hyde Amendment, public funding of abortion. And many of the candidates, including Joe Biden, the nominee, have said it's time to end the Hyde Amendment, that your right to health care shouldn't be based on your zip code. I was wondering where you would be on that. If you're not familiar with the issue, that's fine, I understand. But I was wondering if you have looked at that, if you have an opinion on that.
In 2020, I think that women are capable of making their own healthcare decisions without the interference of the government, whether that's Jim Inhofe or myself. That's where I fall on that issue. And women should have access to quality, affordable healthcare just like everyone else.
So public funding, where do you think you would fall on that?
I think that there are. Again, I think that a woman's healthcare decisions are up to herself and her doctor. When it comes to public funding, I think that there are services out there that provide contraceptives and healthcare and access to healthcare to people who wouldn't otherwise have it through some of these organizations.
Okay. Let me ask you about climate change. How do you think the U.S., both the private sector and the government, have done in terms of reducing emissions over the past 20 years? What needs to be done still, and how on your platform do oil, gas, and coal fit into that?
Well, first of all, I believe climate change is real. My opponent does not. I think everybody knows he's the senator who brought the snowball onto the Senate floor to try to say climate change is a hoax. I think that if you are looking at what's going on in California, look at how severe our storms are now. We obviously have to take steps to fight the adverse effects of climate change, and it's going to be our generation who fixes it. My generation is going to be here for quite some time, and we want to leave the world a better place for our kids. So when we talk about climate change, it's taking reasonable steps and setting goals that are achievable, reducing carbon emissions. Yes, we've done better at it, but I think that we can do more. Adding more charging stations across the state of Oklahoma so that people have an incentive, to drive electric vehicles. I'm a firm supporter of the oil and gas industry, but I believe you can be a supporter of oil and gas while also being a responsible citizen and do something to fight the adverse effects of climate change. This is our environment. We need to be sure that we are taking care of, our air and water. But again, I don't think it has to be one or the other. And I know tomorrow you're talking to my opponent and he'll say that I want to dismantle the oil and gas industry. He says so in his TV commercial. That's just not the case. As Oklahomans, of course, we know how important the oil and gas industry is to our state. And I'll take that into account when I'm looking at legislation. And that may be where I stand up to my caucus, break with my party, and do what's right for Oklahoma, because this is such an important industry.
Well, a couple of things. You said the word goals, and that's, they're kind of proposals that have goals, and then there are mandates. You mentioned California, which has mandates. Which is going to get you there? I mean, if you have a goal, you can always just go, oh, well, try to get there maybe in another 10 years. What mandates might be necessary to reach emission reduction goals?
I think that having a realistic, I don't like the word mandate, I think having a realistic goal that we can achieve so that we aren't, setting ourselves up for failure is the way to go on reducing carbon emissions. Setting a timeline and how long we have to establish that. But it also looks like investing in wind and solar. There's no reason why Oklahoma should be behind Texas when it comes to wind energy, but we don't have leaders who are working to provide the same incentives to that particular industry.
Well, what do you mean behind Texas? I mean, they're huge. I mean, in terms of just megawatts, wouldn't they be able to produce a lot more than Oklahoma just given their size? We're number 2. I mean, that would seem like pretty good.
They have leaders there who are willing to invest in wind energy and
wind energy too. I mean, as far as the incentives go, they've been very generous to the point of being highly controversial in Oklahoma. They've cost the state treasury a lot of money over the last few years, and there's been people who said it was a total mistake how they approached wind incentives. Are you talking about something different?
No, I mean, I'm saying what I've been saying since the beginning of this conversation, that we need to invest in the clean energy economy. Even people who work in oil and gas, a lot of my friends have lost their jobs and are going through a tough time right now. They know that we need to become the energy state. Yes, invest in oil and gas. It is always going to be so critical to our state, but also look at adding jobs in the clean energy sector. If we want our young people to stay here and after they graduate from our colleges and universities, we need to be diversifying and adding jobs where they can have the incentive to want to stay in the state of Oklahoma. And yes, that may be going to work for an oil and gas company. That could also be working in the clean energy sector. I just don't think it has to be one or the other. And right now we're living in this, antiquated mentality of it only has to be this way that we've always done it. That's what has gotten us into this mess. That's why we can't fund public schools. That's why we can't do so many things. It's because of this outdated way of thinking.
Fracking ban?
I actually wouldn't vote to ban fracking.
Do you have any objections to fracking? Are you?
I think that the Corporation Commission took reasonable steps because, when I was a journalist, I covered a lot of earthquakes in Oklahoma. At one point, we had more earthquakes in our state than California did. But, I think that on this, we need to listen to the experts in the field in that area and listen to what they're saying. We have taken care of that problem very significantly with the steps that the Corporation Commission took. And so I think that any piece of legislation that would come across my desk regarding fracking, I would want to talk to the people in the industry to learn best practices to see if it's something that should be enforced or something that we should put some regulations on.
Offshore drilling, do you have any sense about whether you would support offshore drilling or not? I mean, would ban drilling, say, off the Atlantic coast on both Florida coasts?
I think that it's tough to say right now. We're suffering so much in Oklahoma. Right now we have a supply issue, and so a supply and demand issue. And I think when you're looking at these policies, you have to make decisions at a certain time. Looking at the timing of those is so critical. So I would be hesitant to answer that right at this very moment, because if I am in office, I want to know what it looks like, what the industry looks like right now, because we know the industry is cyclical, and right now we're in a really devastating time for our state. So I want to know what's going on exactly whenever I make that decision.
Okay. Let me ask you real quick about taxes, the tax bill of 2017. Would you have voted for that? And what's your feeling about the tax code as it is now, the way income is taxed, wages are taxed, and the way investment earnings are taxed, and what would you like to see changed?
The 2017 tax cuts benefited the ultra wealthy and big corporations. Middle class families once again got left behind. We need tax reform, but it needs to actually benefit our working families. You talk to anybody in the middle class, talk to my parents, talk to myself, talk to my friends. We have not seen the benefits of those tax cuts. We need to make sure that we are taking care of our working families, and that has not happened in the past 4 years.
So the president, the Democratic presidential candidate, has proposed restoring the rates for people who make over $400,000 in adjusted gross income. Where are you on that?
I would support that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Anything else about the tax code that you think needs to be changed?
I think that we also need to look at the estate tax. The bar has risen quite a bit. And again, it just keeps the ultra wealthy. Meanwhile, our teachers, our healthcare workers, working folks are left behind by the current tax code. Most of Oklahoma is not ultra wealthy. Most of us live paycheck to paycheck. And when it comes to a tax code, it needs to be fair and doesn't just leave middle class families behind once again, because they are always the ones who suffer.
A lot of people who support the way that the estate tax is, or who oppose any changes in the estate tax, are farmers, because they say it inhibits passing your farms down from generation to generation. Where would you draw the line at exclusions to try to prevent, like, a farm family from having to sell after one of the parents dies?
I think there needs to be an exception for family farms, and that's doable. But right now, the bar is over $11 million for the estate tax. At one time, it was half that. And so we need to restore the previous levels on the estate tax, but keep that exemption in place so that our family farmers are able to pass on that land to the next generation. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I did want to get you to talk about the town hall situation, your own commitment to town halls.
Sure.
That's this delegation, for the most part, are very active on the road when there's not a pandemic. Lucas, Cole, Langford, Kendra Horn has been one of the most prolific town hall holders, I think, in the last few years. Tell me what your commitment to town halls would be.
I will probably be doing more town halls than anyone. That's been a staple of my campaign, is going out and listening to Oklahomans. Again, Jim Inhofe does not come back here and do town halls. The rest of the federal delegation does, but he's the one who doesn't. He won't even get on a debate stage and debate the issues with me. This is an incredibly important election where we can choose more of the same or someone new who's going to work across the aisle and get things done for Oklahoma. If he won't stand up on a debate stage to talk about issues during these extraordinary times, then we shouldn't punch his ticket for another 6 years in Washington. He's shown us for years that he won't even engage in a town hall. I pledge today I will be back here and listening to Oklahomans. And even for folks who didn't vote for me, I'm still going to be back here and listening to the issues that matter most to them, because that's what we deserve in a senator. I'll even post my schedule online so you'll see who I'm meeting with and who has my ear. It is that kind of leadership we need in 2020, not the same that we've had for the past 26 years in Jim Inhofe.
Just to be specific, and I know this is what you mean, but just a town hall where you stand up, anybody can come, anybody can ask a question, and you'll stay there. Not till the last question is asked necessarily. That can take hours. I've seen Tom Cole do that. But you'll stay there and answer questions from just anybody that shows up.
Yeah, I do that now. I've done that across the state, even during a pandemic, put a mask on and go out and talk to people. And I think it's so important because, we may not agree on everything, but I think that one staple of Oklahoma is we know how to come together. And in tough times, that is exactly what we do. So we can always find common ground, but our leaders need to be in our communities actually listening to know what we need to go get done in Washington. We haven't had that for years. And in my Senate office, that's what it's going to look like.
Well, thank you so much again for coming. I really appreciate it. Appreciate
Absolutely.
You taking the time from your busy campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
And thanks so much for watching. Again, the interview with Abby Broyles, Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate, will be on our website, oklahoma.com, and YouTube channel. Tomorrow, Republican U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe, and the interviews with Congresswoman Kendra Horn and State Senator Stephanie Bice should be available there as well. Thanks so much for watching.